Hi, everybody. Today is the first day that we're going to be reading The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. This is the second short story in our short story unit. And just to give you all a heads up, this short story is significantly harder than the one we just read, Bad Blood. The words are difficult. Some of the concepts we're going to be talking about are difficult, right? That bell work question I gave you yesterday, obviously that one was a difficult one to answer because I'm asking you to kind of tap in to your morals, right? Your sense of what is right and wrong. And we're going to do that, honestly, throughout this whole story. So just be patient if you're not understanding something or if I don't do a very good job of explaining everything. This is your opportunity to really use either Zoom to answer or to ask questions or to really email or message me so that we can really break down and discuss what the meaning behind this short story is, okay? So let's go ahead and get started. The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. The morning of June 27th was clear and sunny, with the fresh warmth of a full summer day. The flowers were blossoming profusely, and the grass was richly green. The people of the village began to gather in the square between the post office and the bank around 10 o'clock. In some towns, there were so many people that the lottery took 2 days and had to be started on June 26th. But in this village, where there were only about 300 people, the whole lottery took less than 2 hours, so it could begin at 10 o'clock in the morning and still be through in time to allow the villagers to get home for noon dinner. The children assembled first, of course. School was recently over for the summer, and the feeling of liberty sat uneasily on most of them. They tended to gather together quietly for a while before they broke into boisterous play, and their talk was still of the classroom and the teacher, of books and reprimands. Bobby Martin had already stuffed his pockets full of stones, and the other boys soon followed in his example, selecting the smoothest and roundest stones. Bobby and Harry Jones and Dickie Delacroix, the villagers pronounced his name, Delacroix, eventually made a great pile of stones in one corner of the square and guarded it against the raids of the other boys. The girls stood aside, talking among themselves, looking over their shoulders at the boys, and the very small children rolled in the dust or clung to the hands of their older brothers or sisters. Soon the men began to gather, surveying their own children, speaking of planting and rain, tractors and taxes. They stood together, away from the pile of stones in the corner, and their jokes were quiet, and they smiled rather than laughed. The women, wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, came shortly after their menfolk. They greeted one another and exchanged bits of gossip as they went to join their husbands. Soon, the women, standing by their husbands, began to call to their children, and the children came reluctantly, having to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin ducked under his mother's grasping hand and ran, laughing back to the pile of stones. His father spoke up sharply, and Bobby came quickly and took his place between his father and his oldest brother. Okay, so this is the exposition, right? We're just getting some background information on everything. So we know that this is taking place in the summertime, right? The kids are out for the summer. We know that it's warm and everything is beautiful and blossoming. And we also know this is a very small town because they said there's only about 300 people. So we have a small village. It's in the month of June, so it's warm and it's in the summertime. And we know that a lottery is about to take place. But we don't really know what that means just yet. We are also introduced to some of the villagers, and we already are starting to get a peek into that one of those themes that we talked about, gender roles and family dynamics. And where we see that is a couple of different places. So first of all, let's talk about the kids. So the kids come into the town square first, and that's where the lottery takes place. And we see that the boys are more concerned about playing and getting the stones ready for whatever is going to happen with them for the lottery. They're a little more rough and rowdy, which is a huge contrast into how the girls are described. And they are described as being stood aside, talking amongst themselves, and looking over their shoulders at the boys, right? Now, these descriptions are very stereotypical as far as how each gender acts in certain situations, right? Generally speaking, stereotypically speaking, boys are more rowdy, more in your face about things, a little more rough, and girls are more quiet and off to the side and usually keep to themselves, right? So we have a very stereotypical description of how each gender acts. And stereotypical means, stereotypical just means that, like, there are a preset idea of ways that certain people should behave. So a jock, a stereotypical jock would be somebody that's all about sports, is a guy's guy, doesn't really care about his grades. He's only worried about sports. The book nerd only reads books. They don't go out and have fun, right? That's what a stereotype is. Basically putting people in boxes. You can only be this one thing, right? And as far as the gender stereotypes go, boys are rowdy and loud, and girls are quiet and keep to themselves. Now we see this kind of furthered idea of the stereotyping with the genders when the men and the women come in. So the men, they're more concerned about their jobs, about money, right? Because they're the ones that got in the community and they work for everything. And the women, they are more worried about the kids, right? Taking care of the house and the family. And we see that right up here. So the men, they're talking about planting and the rain and tractors and taxes, right? So all stuff that has to do with work and making money. And then the women, they say, are wearing faded house dresses and sweaters, and they're in charge of making sure the children come and stand with the rest of their family. So we kind of get, there's a pretty steep contrast here. So not only do the men talk about work and money, but they're also kind of depicted as more lifelike. And what I mean by that is the boys are off playing and they're gathering stones for whatever's about to happen, right? The men, they're joking, they're smiling. Maybe they're not laughing, but they're still having fun. While the girls are described as standing off to the side, talking to themselves, and the women are described as wearing faded house dresses and gossiping, right? So already we have a more positive description for the men and a little bit more of a negative description of the women, right? And that's important. I want you to keep that in mind. Okay, let's go ahead and continue. Oh, another thing, I'm sorry, before we move on. There isn't a lot of respect for the women in this community either. And we can see that first off with the women calling their children over and them not listening, right? They come reluctantly. They have to be called 4 or 5 times. Bobby Martin doesn't even listen the first time until his dad says something. And then finally Bobby pays attention and does what he's supposed to, right? So not only are women portrayed negatively, but they're also not very well respected in this community either. And we're going to see that more here in a minute. Okay, let's continue. The lottery was conducted, as were the square dances, the teen club, the Halloween program, by Mr. Summers, who had the time and energy to devote to civic activities. He was a round-faced, jovial man, and he ran the coal business, and people were sorry for him because he had no children and his wife was a scold. When he arrived in the square, carrying the black box, there was a murmur of conversation among the villagers, and he waved and called, "Little late today, folks." The postmaster and Mr. Graves followed him, carrying a 3-legged stool, and the stool was put in the center of the square, and Mr. Summers set the black box down on it. The villagers kept their distance, leaving a space between themselves and the stool, and when Mr. Summers said, "Some of you fellows want to give me a hand," there was a hesitation before 2 men, Mr. Martin and his oldest son Baxter, came forward to hold the box steady on the stool while Mr. Summers stirred up the papers inside. Okay, so we get some more background information, right? We know that the lottery is always, right, conducted in the town square. That's a tradition, right? Remember we said that tradition means something that happens annually, right? Or whatever it is. It happens often, and usually it's involved with a culture or maybe a religion. So we know that in this town's culture, this village culture, they have the lottery every single year, and it's always in the town square. Okay? We're also introduced to Mr. Summers, who again is described in a very flattering light, which just means like he sounds like a good person, right? It's a positive description. So they said that he was round-faced and jovial. And remember, jovial is one of your vocab words, and that just means that he's happy, right? He seems like a happy person. When I think of this description, it makes me think of Santa Claus a little bit, so that's something you can keep in mind. Also, he's a man in a position of power, right? He devotes all of his time to these civic activities. So he does a square dance, he runs the teen club, he runs the Halloween party, on top of owning his own coal business and conducting the yearly lottery. Now, to be honest with you guys, Mr. Summers' position in conducting the yearly lottery is ironic. And I don't know if you remember what irony is, but to refresh your memories, it just means you expect one thing to happen, but the complete opposite happens. And it's not very clear right now why this is ironic, but just keep in mind that this description of Mr. Summers, right? Because it's the complete opposite of what happens or what the lottery is. So him being a happy, jovial man is the opposite of what's going to happen with the lottery. Another stark contrast between men and women, as far as how they're described in the story, would be Mr. Summers and this description of his wife, right? So they say that his wife was a scold, and that just means like she nags him a lot, or she's mean. So I don't know if any of you have your mom constantly tell you, I need you to do the dishes, I need you to do your chores, pick up your room, stop leaving stuff everywhere, right? Historically speaking, women are considered nags when they do that type of a thing. So they're describing her as a mean, nagging woman, which is the complete opposite of how they described Mr. Summers. And again, that furthers that that stereotype of, and at least in this story, the men are the more lively and the women are not so much, right? They're opposites of each other. And it furthers that idea of what the gender roles are in this story. And we also learn too that everybody is a little wary, and wary means kind of suspicious or cautious of the black box, and we don't know what that is just yet. So we're going to stop it there for today. We'll pick up back here tomorrow. And I know it sounds kind of boring right now, but I promise good stuff does happen, okay? It gets juicy here soon. So just to keep that in mind. If there's anything that you still didn't understand while we were reading today, please message or email me. I will do my best to clarify some things. Otherwise, I will see you all in the Zoom call, and thank you so much.